Welcome back. We are right into the first match of the day here in the European Hearthstone Grandmasters, and it is going to be Pavel versus Zhym. Kind of old school versus new school at this point, honestly, as Zhym, a player that many of you watching just might not be that familiar with as one of the new Grandmasters into the season. But Pavel, unless you've literally tuned into Hearthstone today for the first time ever, you should know who Pavel is, as he is a bit of a big deal. So.
He is. Like, Pavel is such a big deal that there is currently a player whose name is based on a meme that's making fun of a player that Pavel was once a rival with, is now like a top 10 legend player in Hearthstone. That's like 4 levels of influence that have trailed through the Hearthstone scene. Like, Pavel's escapades back around the time where he was world champion and shortly before and shortly afterwards, they're just, going to be legendary. And if there ever is a Hearthstone Hall of Fame, Pavel is going to be one of the first people to really be touted to be put on that list.
Yeah, and also not just popular in Europe. It literally had reached across the world, right? It was a huge hit in China as well, and that's a region that is very much a little bit more on its by itself in terms of the fans and everything. There's a few key players I think they love, and that's like Kalento, Pavel, just to name two. No, they do, right? Just to name two. But that's definitely a tough nut to crack. So very impressed overall. But let's see what this is going to happen here in this match. It's going to be the Warrior band out for Pavel and the Demon Hunter band out for Zhym, which is the expected overall top 2 bands I would have expected going into this weekend. Leaves Pavel with the Highlander Mage, the Galakrond Rogue, and
yeah, not only the top 2 bands, the expected bands that we're seeing based on the flex points in the lineups. You see Pavel has the Mage, so that influences his band decision, whereas on the other side, Zhym has the Warlock, so that influences his decision. And the French players really have relied heavily on Zhym. Alongside Gallon, who I believe has joined their practice group. They have all been prepping together for the majority of weeks, I believe. And I think that is a potentially extremely powerful practice group because Swids has been dominating Europe up until this point through the Swiss. Belkane's put in some good performances as well. Zhym is perhaps the lowest performer out of those 4 players. And then special shout out to Gallon, who I personally believe is like playing some of the best Hearthstone in the world right now based on watching his performances in Americas.
Yeah, and I did mention it yesterday as well, but I think that the true gain of this practice group was this Zoo list, because not only were they some of the first players to even bring it to Grandmasters and put some stock in it in terms of a powerful deck, but they got the results from it as well. They were winning this weeks of Grandmasters. They got enough points to make it, most of them to make it into the top division as well. So it's been pretty successful, and I have no doubt that is going to continue for these guys. But yes, I do agree the expected bans of, well, if one player has Mage and one has Zoo, those bans switch around a little bit just based on what the true strengths are here. But the big question for me today, Soton, is one we've had at least a little bit yesterday, is the Rogue going to perform? Can the players get wins with Rogue? Because honestly, just based off results so far, that is the deck you need to get the win with if you want to get the series over and done with.
It is, yeah, and as I was saying in the intro, I was really seeking a lot of opinions on a couple of matchups in particular, Rogue versus Demon Hunter being one of the big ones, because I've played it the majority recently from the Rogue side, and it felt fine. I made a point yesterday and this morning of playing some of it from the Demon Hunter side, and unfortunately that also felt very good from the Demon Hunter side, so the only conclusion I can really take from that is that I'm the nuts, which doesn't really help me in that particular position, so I saw a lot of opinions, and I think generally, at a low level, it seems to be Demon Hunter favored, and then when you go to like high legend level, maybe like I think Rogue is even or maybe even slightly favored. But then when you go even beyond that, even further to like top level competitive level, where people are finding more edge out of the Demon Hunter as well, which is a surprisingly difficult deck to play, I think there may be, and this does seem to be the consensus of opinion from top pros, that the Demon Hunter is back in charge again.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to now that we get to see Demon Hunter in like last week, of course, in the final week of Swiss for Grandmasters. We do get to see the evolution of the decks and lineups as weeks go on now in round robin. So far, though, in this game of Zhym on the Warrior on the bottom, just going to get the old Tolve into Rampage off. I'm going to start pressuring Pavel quite heavily. And this is a strategy that is, I think, a fair amount of success against Mage as Warrior. If you can get an aggro start, I like almost, not over-committing always sounds bad. It's a negative thing to do. But I like heavily committing to the aggro start if you have it versus Mage.
Yeah. just plowing straight through that Flame Ward, forcing Pavel to use the Polymorph anyway, so the Flame Ward essentially just had 0 impact, which is a huge deal in this matchup, because Flame Ward can potentially be a sometimes problematic card if you engineer the wrong board state into it.
Yeah, and already my question is, with the Polymorph as an emergency plan, did Pavel have to Flame Ward on curve there? But effectively, even if he killed the Tolvir, well, it's a Flame Ward against this deck that normally can go quite wide just to kill a 2-3. Like, was that even worth it? Especially with Polymorph and Rolling Fireball as backups.
Right.
Ancient Mystery is going to go for the Ice Barrier. The Pavel is running the 1 Ice Barrier, 1 Flame Ward version in terms of the secret package in this Highlander. Whereas Zhym, under the Warrior, is going to be running that Grom, which we can see in hand, of course. I think that's very quickly just become a standard. But there are no eggs to Tolvir in this list. Nothing else overly fancy.
Great pickup with the Corsair Cash. Hits the Ankar as well, which means essentially his entire game plan is unlocked now. Being able to draw Risky Skipper on demand, which is the #1 key card in the deck. Curious to see whether we'll see an Inner Rage this early. It does potentially represent a ton of damage over time on the Warmaul Challenger. But of course, even this early, you're kind of staring at that Grom Inner Rage combo in your hand and just thinking about the possibilities.
It's very true. I was actually, for a second, looking at Inner Rage, Coin, Blood Boil this turn.
Oh, before, yeah, sure, before even like
before the draw,
before
the draw. And just get it out, because then you'd have the buffed Challenger. Then you'd just have like a 6-8 on board.
Right.
I don't know. It seemed pretty strong. Obviously, the Corsair Cash, never bad. Getting the weapon drawn and buffed and so on. The Inner Rage for Grom, as you said. But because he starts staring down 2 Blood Boil Brutes, I was just considering it that maybe just chucking one out on turn 5 as a full health minion against Mage just isn't that bad.
Yeah, I think I would have liked to see it if it wasn't for the Corsair Cash draw, and you kind of see that philosophy played out here from Zhym. He says, yep, just play my biggest minion. Just chunky mid-range pressure.
6-8. Yeah, it's a pretty good card, actually.
Just strictly better than Boulder Fist Ogre.
Yep.
It's not the highest standard for a Hearthstone card, really, is it?
No. But still, not too bad. See you, Matt. Right, try and slow this down a little bit. Goes for Divine Shield Rush there just to kill off the Challenger, but that still leaves a ton of damage on board, and quite quickly, you've got to think if Zhym chooses to just go face with all of this, he can Inner Rage Grom next turn. Is this just slowly edging towards just aggro Warrior Soul? It feels like a lot of the games play out that way.
There are certain hands. I mean, it's why this deck's so good, right? It's such a Swiss Army knife of a deck. As long as you can like recognize what a particular hand means to you and just adapt your play according to it. Some games you are just going to play hard aggro. Some games you are going to play long and go for a combo finisher. Some games you are just going to draw your entire deck and then just overwhelm your opponent with resources. It changes by matchup, from matchup to matchup, and from draw to draw, and you have to be able to adapt to both of those things. Meanwhile, that is just the curve from Zhym.
Wow.
Biggest minion every turn, everything goes face. Pavel, nothing in hand to deal with it. And that is quick as you like, game 1 going over to the French player.
Yeah, very, very quick game there. And then, although I could say, I like the confidence from Zhym just going for that aggro play, that really is just the way that if you can play the game, especially against Mage in that fashion, you just should, because as you can see, they don't really have great answers ready for the potential high health minions that Warrior can get hold of. And then you put in stuff like Rampage, even Armor Smiths to try and soak up like Renos and some removal. It's looking pretty good. But that was just game 1, and seem to be taking a leaf out of Asia Pacific book so far, at least in speed of games. So we're going to go to a quick break while we get ready for game number 2. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back to continue Pavel versus Zhym. We are back and ready to continue the series between Pavel and Zhym. Game number 1 went very quickly over to Zhym there as he just got him with the Warrior. And an interesting thing that's after we looked at the stats for the past 2 days is Warrior has such an incredibly high win rate. Demon Hunter's obviously doing well as well, but it's definitely scary when you consider that not banning Warrior in a lineup, almost regardless of what your lineup is and how it clashes, feels interesting to me, because I do wonder if a deck ever gets to the point where you just have to ban it because of the nature of its just sheer power level. What do you think?
Well, quick pop quiz though, Raven. No looking to your left or right, whichever monitor you've got the win rates on. What's the highest win rate? What's the highest win rate deck in Grandmasters this week?
Highlander Hunter.
No, false. It's Quest. It's Quest Warlock with a 100% win rate.
Oh, that doesn't count. What's worse is I actually did look at it earlier and was like, oh yeah, that's kind of funny. Rivia's got the win, right? But come on, it's Highlander Hunter second then.
What is Highlander Hunter? Highlander Hunter is 80%. Yeah, so it's second. Yeah, it's just ahead of the two main warrior archetypes, which, you know, to your point, yes, it does seem kind of sketchy to be bringing a lineup that needs to leave warrior up, because as we see, it's 77% win rate right now in this week of Grandmasters, which is abnormally high. The deck is so good, and it just gets exponentially better, where you'll almost get false negatives practicing on ladder, where you'll bring a lineup, you'll run into a bunch of warrior on ladder, and you'll do fine. But when you're playing against the best players in the world playing that deck, the deck just has an infinitely high skill ceiling to the point where the top players can keep squeezing more and more and more out of it. So you'll get all these false negatives that say that, you know, your lineup is fine, like warrior doesn't beat your lineup that badly, and then when you play against the very best players, they're just going to stomp you.
Yep, and we've seen that so far. It was a quick one, not much Pavel could have done about it, but we are moving on to game number 2. Pavel now on his, I would say, power class that he has up, which is going to be his Demon Hunter going up against this Rogue Subtle. So you were mentioning you looked at this matchup. Pavel playing the Priestess of Fury version. Does that make him better or worse versus Rogue, do you feel?
I think worse is generally agreed upon. I think one of the big problems, and one of the reasons why, like, maybe my Rogue Demon Hunter knowledge might have been a little bit outdated, is that I hadn't practiced a great deal with the new build with the beaming sidekicks, because obviously beaming sidekicks are massive in the early game against Rogue, right? Because you just drop your 1-drop, you can even coin out beaming sidekick if you're going second immediately. Boom, built-in backstab protection, built-in seal fate protection. And then you can just snowball because you stick a minion against Rogue, and if you stick a minion against Rogue, it gets much, much worse for them much, much quicker. So not having access to those fast starts and having to deal with some slower stuff later on, I do think is a bit of a handicap for the slower list. But I will say, just in a vacuum, Priestess of Fury, the card itself, if you get there in a reasonable position against Rogue, is a beating for Rogue to deal with. More so for the stealth version, because they don't have access to Blackjack Stunner. Even against the secret version, that Blackjack Stunner is about their only real way of dealing with it, aside from something generated from a spell deck.
Yeah, one thing to note, even if that's the case, it still did something, and it will still do something the turn if you choose to replay it as well. So it is very, 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 very good. In the meantime, though, Zhym just keeping hold of this board. He does have an ambush live in his secret, so we're not getting into the bamboozle shenanigans too early in the day yet, Sol. So you've got time to build yourself up for it. But Pavel now having an I-beam means he can do something about this. Although I believe Pavel does not have full confirmation of what the secret is.
No.
I think all he's
Not at
done
this
is equip
point.
the weapon, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I grow impatient.
And there you see the face of a man who is trying to work his way through rogue secrets. This is the evolved form of Pavel, though, that does at least know that rogue secrets exist, so that's a good first step.
I grow impatient.
But you start to see, I think this is a very good example of a hand that is a symptom of this deck, right? So many 5-cost cards in the deck and above. Your hand can look like this, and suddenly you're getting outboard presence by rogue, even though your rogue opponent has not really overly had a lot of removal, right? There was the backstab, of course, but that's not that much of just a backstab going down, and Pavel's not really been able to keep up here. He's going to point out all waves.
Straight for the face as well. Yep, wants to disrespect respect the bamboozle, the threat of bamboozle. Doesn't want to be slamming into any of these minions and potentially wasting all of his weapon charges clearing up. Decent timing from Zhym's perspective for the Boom Pistol Bully, because one of the few ways it gets value in the matchup is against Gladebound Adept, which coin weapon and then your 5-mana turn comes afterwards. That does seem to be a pretty big signaler that it could be the Gladebound coming down.
Yeah, Pavel now being able to play around that much as well with this I-beam into twin slides. And there's a few ways he could have even done this as well. Most importantly, this reduces the threat on the board down by a ton. He gets to push loads of damage. I think he should just leave the 1-1 up here, save the charge, and then just have Metamorphosis into Priestess of Fury, or just the second Metamorphosis hero power into almost guaranteed lethal.
I think it might be worth killing the 1-1 just because how much
he's on
work.
3, right?
He's on 3 charges, and it protects your 4-2 against like Praise Galakron, Rush Lackey, just being spent on the minion on board. There's some little breakpoints that it might change. Pavel disagrees though.
The main point being Metamorphosis plus the 2 procs of it almost kills him now, and there's not tons he can do about it at this moment in time.
That's fair. Galakron is the kicker. We do see that in hand for Zhym, but it is relatively unlikely to be there. The loss of Ziliax for this deck is such a beating. It shouldn't seem like 3 or maybe 6 health should make as much difference as it does. But the thing is with Rogue in aggro matchups is that they're almost always counter-racing, right? Like, it's not like a Control Warrior or a Priest strategy where you actually outlast the aggro deck. It's, okay, I'm going to make a swing turn, get a big board, then I'm going to start hitting you in the face instead, and then we're going to race, and we're going to see who wins. Just an extra swing of 3 health in that position where you leave a lifesteal Taunt in play is just such a big deal. So the lack of that card now in the current meta is making Rogue's life so much more difficult in some of these matchups.
Yeah, it is one of the age-old weaknesses of Rogue, isn't it? It's just that damage permanence, and most importantly, in the aggro matchups, if you survive up until around this point without being too far behind, you normally end up taking board as Rogue, right? Because of tools such as backstab and some of the tempo elements you have with sap and so on. So yeah, the Ziliax is the nice security factor of not only the 3 health, but also just adding to that kind of board dominance that you hit towards the mid-game. Pavel taking his time here, but I do struggle to do anything but Metamorphosis hero power at this point. But make your opponent have to have exactly heal to even consider it.
Yeah, it just seems too clean. Like, you Metamorphosis, you smack this turn, even if they have Galakron on curve, well, they're at 8. So it would have to be Galakron into 0 mana shield of Galakron, exactly.
Or Kronk.
To be able to stop you. Or Kronks, yeah, sure.
And nope, that's not it.
Nope.
There's nothing Zhym can do about it, and like lightning, we're already moving past game number 2. So Pavel responds in kind to the beating he took from Zhym's Warrior, making almost just as quick a game with his Demon Hunter up against Zhym's Rogue there. So pretty quick couple of games there. Maybe, although those decks, the Demon Hunter and the Warrior, can go longer into games, not too much of a huge shock that they both got a pretty safe win, especially when they've not faced each other, where then the question becomes a little bit more as to more of a struggle. But now I think, now that the two strongest decks are out the way, we're going to get into the thick of this series.
Yeah, if anything, that was even quicker, right? He just ended it on turn 6, whereas Zhym ended it on turn 8 in the previous series. Yeah. So yeah, just returning the beating, as you say. But yeah, that really didn't see the impact of the slower hand that that was drawn there from Pavel, because he didn't really even get to Fell Screamer and Priestess of Fury stuff. Like, he just had Warglaives and Metamorphosis, and that is the classic Hearthstone combo of damage plus damage equals damage, which is one of the most solid combos you will see in any game of Hearthstone.
Yeah, also as well, Zhym is running a Frozen Shadow Weaver, but only the one, of course, because he was playing Highlander Rogue. So just unfortunate there, you see the difference Frozen Shadow Weaver has already made this weekend in other matches we've cast, but just at that point, the Warglaives just let Pavel say, okay, well, this adds up to this, and I Metamorphosis. That's just how much life he has left, and it's going to end the game. And with that much threat on the backswing, there was no Van Cleef early on, for example. Pavel was just given the freedom to do that. We're going to move on now to Zoo versus Mage as we go into game number 3.
Yeah, Zoo, certainly one of the hot topic decks of the week. Still some people unconvinced of its efficacy, or even of just particular builds of it. I see TJ still out there talking a lot of smack about my boy Wolf Rider in the deck over there on Americas. Doesn't believe in the Charge Zoo, but this actually is not the Charge Zoo from Zhym. He is playing the pretty consistent list that Gallant and the French players have been running throughout all of the weeks. It did adapt slightly after the Sacrificial Pact nerf, because that was just not a card they could afford to run anymore, which they sometimes were for the Demon Hunter matchup. So instead, like, Evil Genius came into the deck instead. But apart from that, it's remained pretty consistent for this practice group since week number 1, really.
Yeah, it does feel like the French variant, I think it is fair to call it that, because even just this Zephyrus, which I've not really seen anyone else run outside of this group, as you said, but against Mage, it's just, when you aren't running the charge variant, or even just half and half, like some players are, I do feel like the matchup is on a bit of a tightrope, because you can get huge minions, you can put on a lot of pressure, but Mage has access to big board players, freezes, and without charge, the threat that Mage can be a bit more secure about its health total at certain points in the game. So I think this matchup is actually pretty close, at least just from a feeling against this specific version of Zoo.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think this is one of the big hit points for the charge version of the deck, is exactly that dynamic you describe, where, you know, you're playing against a freeze deck, a hard removal deck. Well, they can't freeze or hard remove charge minions that you're just holding in your hand and periodically making bigger and bigger and bigger, and then that just ends up getting them at the end of the game.
Yeah, that's next expansion. Mage gets a card, freeze a charge minion in your opponent's hand. It's just stuck there, you just can't play it.
No. It would be 10 mana, freeze 10 random charge minions in your opponent's hand. You've got to stay on theme, Raven.
Yeah, castable for 5 mana if you're feeling it.
Yeah.
It's just so much. I'm waiting for a card to come out that's just called Mana Cheat. It's gonna happen. I'm calling it now.
I'm waiting for a Mage card to come out that's just called Roll the Dice.
Yeah. Ulpera should be a Mage card then. Rolling dice. In the meantime, though, the Mana Saber has come down for Pavel, and again, without under too much threat this early in the game, which is often the case versus Zoo. It never really goes off too crazy super early. Does mean he can use this Mana Saber to get to that ever perfect turn 4 to 6 mana in 1.
Yeah, the Flame War timing was interesting here for me. I guess Pavel's using it because he wants to cut some health off this board, so no matter what is developed next turn from Zhym, he doesn't get above that magical 10 marker for the Reno Relicologist as the follow-up with the ramp. But I feel like that was pretty difficult to do anyway, right? With the extra 3 attack that you have coming through from the Mana Saber.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of like half hit side hit puts 10 on the board in a very
That's true.
8 on the board. You know, it's 10. It's 10. I'm doing them.
It is 10. You're
I
right.
keep thinking of the scrapping buffs. It's like carpet. It's a 3-8 already. What am I doing? But yeah, it does put a lot on the board. But I do agree that I think this is just a safety precaution for Pavel. Just saying, Reno will clear this board no matter what.
Yeah, and actually on reflection, I think that's super smart from Pavel because he can throw all his resources into just guaranteeing that this turn goes off the way that he plans. Because after this turn, he doesn't need all of those resources anymore because he's just this far ahead on board. So, like, what good is a Flame Ward to him after this point?
And it's fairly likely the Mana Saber lives, and he has follow-up if that's the case then, because he has Tiamat. So, yeah, I like this overall. Although, double Fiendish Servant. Ooh. Should he just... There's no drawback to playing the second one, right? Doesn't he want the second one down?
It's the same.
Looks cool.
Yeah, regardless, you have a 7/6 carpet at the end of the turn, no matter which way you do it.
Ooh, now Zephyrus and the breath as well to pick up some options. Interesting. Zephyrus wouldn't overly offer him anything for 4, even if he played it now, right? It would offer a death almost no matter what.
Your wish is my suggestion.
But still ping, I think, regardless. Alright, let's just keep it simple.
Yeah, I like
Especially
it.
when you face it down the carpet, right? Don't try and do anything too fancy. Just kill it so it's dead. Some players like to do.
I had a quick look at Arcane Breath trade Zephyrus into Edwin Van Cleef as a 6/6, which does make your board slightly bigger while clearing the board. But it's very a marginal improvement, and this preserves a resource in your hand in the Arcane Breath, so it's fine.
Yeah, I half even considered Arcane Breath to open up more options either that turn or maybe next turn, just because it's probably going to be Tiamat regardless. So,
yeah,
but again, like, I think Pavel's in such a great spot. He doesn't need to go fishing for a spell right now. I think there's always going to be a decent target for Arcane Breath, especially since his Malygos isn't active yet anyway.
Double time and double pay.
Wind Fury mode.
Right.
Gotta be. Imagine trading.
Makes me sick a little bit.
Does it actually play around things? I mean, I guess Evil Genius, maybe, just not having to invest the mana in playing a minion first.
Hate it. Would have gone forward to face every day of the week. I don't know. I think of all the minions to trade into there, literally a 1/1 that does nothing else now is the one I would have ignored the most.
Yeah. You can make the argument that he's setting up lethal anyway because he still has 16 in play, but then you can also make the counter argument that if he goes face for 4, he only needs the Tiamat to survive. The Reno isn't relevant anymore. So swings and roundabouts.
Trying to make a good wordplay joke there, and it just didn't happen.
Stick to your lane, buddy.
Along the lines of Reno, the irrelevant ologist.
The irrelecologist. Yeah, that just doesn't work.
And the irrelevant ologist.
Yeah.
I tried, okay? Sometimes if you try hard enough, you might just get one good saying now and again.
That is not active.
Tower
Don't
of
get
Creation.
excited.
Too much of a board there, and Zhym was just never allowed to get going. Pavel just had the pressure, and we've seen a few games of this in Reno Mage. I know it's not your favorite deck, but this weekend we've seen a lot of it just going almost threat bombing, right? And although Reno is, of course, removal, but still on curve, it's a minion that keeps tempo on board for you. And then there was more follow-up, and then more follow-up. So Zhym, especially without an early scrap him, just didn't have the cards to even get anything on board to challenge Pavel's minions, never mind win the game. So it was a pretty one-sided one, that one.
Yeah, I will never doubt the power of the deck, at least with Mage, my personal preferences aside, but I think that was very nicely played from Pavel, and I think a lot of it was that one turn of recognition where he was setting up his Reno turn. It didn't end up being super relevant with the, the Flame Ward setup, but on reflection, even though I was sort of question marking it originally, it does make so much sense, because why run the risk of just, the Beaming Sidekick Magic Carpet exactly, or whatever other method he can get out of range of the 13 total clear that you have with the Mana Saber and the Reno. If that does become possible, well, suddenly your game plan's just out the window at that point, whereas Pavel recognizes that if he does get that clear, he wins the game very close to 100% of the time, so he just doesn't need any additional resources after that point. He doesn't need clearing power. He just wants to continue to play a minion every turn, which is pretty much what he did.
Yeah, really just displaying one of those ongoing things with Hearthstone. There's level 1 of learning rules, getting the most out of your cards, using the cards to maximum value. And then the next stage is the recognition of when you don't have to do that, right? And you just need to make sure something happens. Even if you're wasting value on certain cards, that's what you need to do to achieve a win in the game. So I do agree. I do like it there from Pavel. And now he only has his Rogue left over to take a win with. And just at a very quick glance, it is the Stealth 2 of Rogue there for Pavel there, and it looks like it's going to be pretty good here. Boom Pistol in his deck as well as one of the tech choices, but outside of that, it's a subtle, spicy 2 of deck, almost as far as he can take.
Your soul shall be
Yeah,
mine.
just that one-off Boom Pistol bully. It's 2 Devoted Maniacs still, which has been a point of contention to me, whether you do need to play these 2 Devoted Maniacs, because they are quite weak in Rogue, where they don't generate, immediate tempo at the same time as they do in Warlock or Shaman, for example, where they seem, much more playable. But still, he is playing 2 of those, 1 Boom Pistol bully. But he's off to a pretty good start here. I think you have to file any opening hand with Spy Mistress against aggro as a decent start. But he's going to need a little bit more help, because I think this is a fairly rotten matchup for the Rogue up against Zhym.
Yeah, it's one of the matchups where you really do just want even a medium-sized Van Cleef in the early game, right? Just to beat down some of the early aggression, or at least have a plan versus that Magic Carpet. But the Spy Mistress does help. And although, this is where it gets interesting for me, is the Spy Mistress just good enough as a... Oh, okay, nice. As a 1-mana kill an opponent's 1-drop? Or do you think Pavel's ever going to save it to try and deal higher damage to a more key minion other than just a Battle Mage?
So I think in a vacuum, your point stands of you don't necessarily need to kill 1-drops. You can just pick stuff off with Dagger, you can draw Backstab, whatever else. It's, making sure you have damage to deal with key minions like Magic Carpet or even, Flame Imp and other 3 attack minions that come down later is more important. If you just look at the quality of his hand right now in just terms of things to do in the opening, I'm quite happy to just trade this off and just play another 1-drop here to replace it.
Yeah, the fact he got double 1 this turn is huge, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because if he played the cat, and obviously he drew the Spy Mistress, so he had this info going into the turn, but if he just had the Pharaoh cat, a part of you does want to play it, but then you don't get to Dagger and just float a mana, and then your turn gets a little bit weird. But yeah, this looks very good. And now, Zhym's just facing down 2 3-attack minions that you cannot interact with. So the onus really is on Pavel to decide when he wants to commit this damage, which is huge when Carpet has 6 health.
Yeah, Pavel did choose not to make the trade, which, clearly he's looking for that investment later, but there are several punishes there. You saw one of them, which was Evil Genius. Value trade the minion and Evil Genius it is, a really big swing for Zhym. But I think Pavel's thinking was, well, if that value trade happens, most of the time, my play next turn is Mermy plus Dagger, and then I can just Dagger down the minion anyway, so why would I trade with it? But there's always, Voidwalker, Shield Bearer, all that stuff on top of that as well that can mess with that. Beaming Sidekick even can mess with that. I think there were a fair few punishes that Pavel's plan could have run into there.
Do agree with that completely. Pavel does have a follow-up with his Devoted Maniac,
Nice.
Shield of Galakrond, and then after all the talks of save it, what do you want to trade into? Pavel's like, I trade it into the face. as he just pushes the damage and says, actually, Zhym, if you want to stop this, you have to trade. And I actually really like this from Pavel. He's just saying, well, you're the aggressor in the matchup. If you feel you have to start trading against my 1-drops at this point in the game,
I wonder.
Yeah, I'm into it. It is quite a hefty magic carpet punish, I would say. You know that there's, at minimum the lackeys there to deal with it, but it's still only 1-drop. And the problem is just the magic carpet then just staying consolidated on the board. Both of your 3-1s have died, so you don't really have the options to be able to deal with a carpet at that point.
Yep, that is definitely the drawback of this plan. One thing I do like, though, as well, is the 1-drops, even the biggest 1-drops, just still don't survive the trades themselves, so it still actually clears on Pavel's side of the board as well.
Have you met my boy Shield Bearer, Raven?
Oh, okay. Is he running 1? I think Zhym's running 1, right?
Yeah, he's running 1.
Yeah, all right. Outside of Shield Bearer. Yeah, they do normally die. Do you remember Thral Mal?
Thral Mal?
Do you remember that conversation?
No.
Is that what you heard? Maybe that was just with Pavel. I'm just confusing you both now. Someone I cast with, we had a discussion about that. It doesn't matter. You had to be there, Solon. You weren't there with me.
I'm sorry that I deserted you for a year, Raven. When will you forgive me?
Maybe never, honestly. Maybe never. In the meantime, though, there is likely... I say like... I was looking at coin hand of Gul'dan potential for Zhym, but maybe he just plays everything and then Soulfires. Like
does
a
seem
bad outcome, yeah.
Infinitely more likely, yeah.
Yeah. I just didn't register that he could just throw his whole hand out this turn.
Yeah.
Seems good to me.
Well, that got awkward.
Wait. Did he ever need to tap?
It looked like a pretty solid dump your hand turn to me.
Like, what would tap do to change your turn, I guess, is what I'm trying to think about. What would he draw into that would have stopped him doing this? Now it just makes it worse. Especially, obviously, because he's doing exactly Soulfire, but... If he'd drawn a 2-drop, this wouldn't have worked, right?
Well, huge 50-50 coming up now. And
I missed it.
Boom.
Camera casting. That was, honestly, from Zhym, unneeded from where I'm sat, Sol. That was strange.
Yeah, I agree.
Who in their right mind
Was that
hides
just a
blue?
prophet and knew the hand of Gul'dan was going to get hard cast?
Me too.
Kobold Lackey is huge here. Choose to go
Also as well
Rush
with-
Lackey instead, sorry, and
Yeah.
preserve the Kobold Lackey as a more universal option. More
Also
universal in that it can remove minions when you don't have a board, but also more universal in that it can just shoot Zhym in the face with it at some point if that's still his game plan.
But also as well, it utilizes the minions that are currently sleeping on board now, which I like. And
Yeah.
because Pavel has a ton of health, he can just face down this 7, right? He can prioritize the carpet because he has the health to soak the 7 damage. If he was on a lower health total, then we might have seen a little bit more of a heavy removal turn, and maybe not even kill the carpet. But I like this overall. Just get the minions you've got on board used.
It also plays into his curve perfectly with the Togwaggle on the following turn. Because the Kobold is such a universal lackey, he can pretty much just play it in any board state and then just drop Tog right afterward. Whereas, if he'd used the Kobold and he had a Rush Lackey and a Titanic Lackey in his hand, there's no guarantee that he's getting use out of those on the turn where he drops the Togwaggle.
Yep. Just smart play, honestly. I want from this Skyvateer as well. He's going to get an extra card draw, which, although again, we mentioned that his turn looks pretty good almost regardless of what he draws, still, more options is good. And him having to trade away the board does keep a lot of damage there. But as you said, this Kobold Lackey, look at the difference it makes. And when the rogue gets to just play Tog and do not a lot else and be happy about it, you're feeling pretty bad. And there's a second hand of Gul'dan Rub salt in the wound from Zhym.
And never fear, viewers. Here in Europe, we take wondrous ones from our Togwaggles.
Useful things, eager to share.
So crazy, because this could have happened with Zhym having way more mana this turn. Tons of great pickups here from Pavel.
Yeah, the initial praise was pretty low impact, but it improved quite a bit after that.
Yeah, sorry, I meant like tons of potential draws, right, as from the wand. There's still tons of good cards in the deck. And even just this Krunks with a Titanic Lackey as just a base play seems very powerful, never mind anything else.
Yeah. He does have 2 Invokes currently already played, and you can see 2 more in hand already, just with the cheap Praise Galacrons. So that is, you know, this turn he can basically set up to play fully invoked Galacron next turn if he really wants to.
Yeah, a bit of a shame for Pavel just to have the access to another Rush Lackey, which is what he might have been fishing for there as well. Because then Krunks could have just hacked down this carpet, and you basically feel like you've won the game if this carpet dies now for Pavel, right?
I mean, there's still another Praise Galacrons.
Return is nigh.
So why not? I'm just going to taunt it.
On your way.
I think I would have fished for the Lackey, honestly.
Yeah, I would too.
Look at the difference, right? I feel like the one way in some worlds that you lose this game if you're Pavel is the fact that this carpet makes something crazy happen.
Yeah.
Can Zhym even do 8? Can. He loses his board. Or at least he loses the hacking minions on his board.
Hey, I got you, friend. Guys, I can't move.
Wait. Did you buff the carpet instead there?
Yeah, pretty sure. It also
the
look
difference
weird.
between 2 and 3 health doesn't make much apart from you get an extra minion on board right now.
Well, meanwhile, fully invoked Galacrons, Claw for 5 extra damage. That is going to end the game and end the series for your boy, Pavel, who is going to find himself rounding out what now becomes a solid week. 1-1 in record overall. Whereas Zhym looking to start his Barcelona career with a bang. That is such a weird sentence. To start his Barcelona career with a bang, unfortunately, is going to go out with a 0-2 record in week number 1 of Swiss.
Yeah, really, honestly, I was a bit quiet towards the end of the game there, but that's because, I don't know if this is going to sound too harsh, but I feel like there was the tap turn, as we mentioned a lot, with this guaranteed Soulfire into Hand of Gul'dan that didn't happen because Zhym chose to tap. And I felt like the game just went downhill from there for Zhym. And even that last little buff, obviously it did not matter based on what Pavel's hand was, but even just buffing up the Argent Squire instead of having the carpet on the board at the end of the turn seemed small and insignificant, but just another just strange choice that at least I didn't understand. So yeah, I feel like I don't know if that game just went a bit downhill there for Zhym.
So I think I can at least tell you what he was thinking, which I imagine he was looking to tap for another 1-drop, and then because he had Carpet on board at that time, and I believe Flame Imp in his hand. So if he taps and he picks up another 1-drop, he doesn't have to necessarily do the Hand of Gul'dan turn. That turn, he can delay it for 1 more turn. He can just use his Carpet to rush through the Shield of Galacron that was on the board. But he had a nice clear anyway, just with the Soulfire. The problem with that is that he invests health in his carpet. He has to bump into the Shield of Galacron a lot of the time there anyway. But then also in the Soulfire world, he draws cards off Hand of Gul'dan, which can then be 1-drops that he can rush into the Shield of Galacron at the end of the turn. So I do think it was a difficult turn. I do think there was a lot of things to consider. But it did look like the life tap was a little bit of an unnecessary risk in that spot.
Yeah, I believe we can take an updated look at the... I'm not sure, was it the stand-ins? We'll have to see. But anyway, let's have a quick check. Oh, sorry, yes, of course, just the plan for the day. Apologies. Pavel taking the win there over Zhym. And then Kalento versus Tides coming up. And, what do you say? Was the European Derby going to be playing out now, Sol, as we go into this next match?
Well, I guess since we've just come from the FC Barcelona eSports player, we should go with the El Calento Clasico name instead, just to stay on brand.
It's going to be an interesting one here, though, as we mentioned yesterday, or was it maybe even Friday at this point? All these matches merge into one for me. Is Kalento one of the few players bringing face hunter, at least in Europe, right? We've not seen too many hunters just full stop in the European region this weekend, something I imagine will change going